The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's Friday with Vistage webinar. Before we begin, I'd like to go over some items to help you participate in today's webinar. If you're experiencing technical difficulties, please dial support at 888-259-8414. When you join the webinar today, you selected to join either by phone call or computer audio. If for any reason you would like to change your selection, you can do so by accessing your audio pane in your attendee control panel to the right of your screen. During the presentation, all participants will be in listen-only mode. You will have the opportunity to submit text questions to today's presenters by typing your questions into the questions pane of the control panel. You may send in your questions at any time. We will collect these and address them during the Q&A session at the end of today's presentation. Please note that a PDF of today's presentation is available for download on your control panel. A recording of the presentation will be sent to attendees via email within the next week. I would now like to introduce the moderator for today's webinar, Vistage Director of Research, Ann Petrick. Ann?
Thank you so much. Today's session, Are You Focused on Making the Right Decisions as a CEO, is based on research conducted by Vistage that revealed the key decisions and investments that CEOs of small and mid-sized businesses were focused on in 2018. Now that we're at the end of the second quarter, we'd like to share some of the latest research from the Q1 Confidence Index survey, as well as recommendations for how you might approach talent, customers, and operations through the rest of the year. Today's session will be a discussion with Vistage Chief Research Officer Joe Galvin and Business Strategist Marc Emmer. So to introduce our speakers, Joe Galvin is the Chief Research Officer, as I mentioned, which is the research arm for Vistage Worldwide. Vistage Research provides members with the most credible, data-driven, and actionable thought leadership on the strategic issues facing CEOs as well as key executives in small organizations. Through collaboration with the Vistage expert community and curation of content, Vistage members can benefit from this business research specific to small and mid-sized businesses. We research we are the most trusted resource for research data and expert perspectives on the issues and topics of high performance small and mid-sized businesses. So welcome, Joe.
Thank you, Ann.
And next we have Marc Emmer, who is president of Optimize Inc., a growth consultancy specializing in strategic planning. Marc speaks, writes, and consults throughout North America and is a recognized thought leader on the topic of strategy. Marc's second book, Momentum: How Companies Decide What to Do Next, was released this month and was covered by Yahoo Finance, CNBC, and CBS. Marc has crafted strategic plans for over 130 organizations, including more than 40 Vistage members, and is a member himself. Welcome, Marc.
Thank you, Ann. Good morning.
Good morning. So today we're going to focus on the SMB CEO, and our agenda includes reviewing CEO confidence, both in the economy as well as growth for their own businesses. We'll look at the major decisions and investments from 2018 and what those leaders are focused on. Then Joe and Marc will talk about strategies in the areas of talent, customers, and operations. And at the end, Marc will summarize for us the top 10 trends for SMB CEOs. As we mentioned in the beginning, you'll have the opportunity to submit questions in your questions pane, so we'll have time at the end for Q&A. So as our speakers are sharing some of their topics, please feel free to share those, and I'll be monitoring those throughout the session. So Joe, first let's go into confidence in the economy and what we learned in our latest survey.
Thank you, Ann. As Ann mentioned, 4 times a year we survey the Vistage member base, and we focus specifically on those members with CEO, business owner, president titles to understand what their thoughts are regarding their confidence in the economy, their thoughts about their own performance, and the things they're doing to drive growth in their organization. We've been doing this for almost 14 years, and it's given us a long-term view of what our members think and how that connects to the actual economy. And in our most recent survey that we did in March, and we had over 1,700, we had 1,712 responses. What you see is it's slightly off. It's off a couple points from the 110.3 from Q4. I would comment though, in taking over the long run, 110.3, that's a 10-year high. So we're just off a 10-year high of confidence, meaning our CEOs are extremely optimistic about the state of the economy, the state of their business, and where they see that going. And where the index gets really powerful is when you now lay it over an index of GDP. And you'll see that the sentiment, the confidence level of our community is a direct predictor of how GDP will follow. And as you look at this and now you look back all the way back to 2013, you can see and kind of use the end of the Great Recession is that we're close to, if not at, a historical high or a 10-year high. So it's clear there's a high degree of confidence and energy in our community based on this response. You take that to the next level, and now we get into some of the specifics on these questions. And again, 1,712 respondents to these questions, and we asked this in early March, so this data is very fresh. When we talk about confidence, what we see is 62% thinks the economy is improved. Now that's a slight decline, but remember we're coming off a 10-year high. 35% of CEOs expect the economy to continue to post gains, and this is on top of the gains that we saw last year, the prior year. In fact, in this long, slow recovery we've experienced since the Great Recession, these are all compounded upon those, on top of those levels of growth. Mark, let me ask you real quick to jump in. What do you see, and what are your thoughts on the folks you work with as it relates to their confidence in the economy and the economy's ability to sustain their growth?
Yeah, I think part of what's kind of manifesting right now is often referred to economists as a phenomenon known as animal spirits. So meaning that the capital markets react based on emotion. And after the election, there was a lot of euphoria about the prospects of tax reform and reduced regulation and so on. And I think some of that euphoria is kind of worn off, and there's certainly some fear based on the news cycle about North Korea and the trade war and just general political uncertainty. So, you know, the markets are very skittish, and us entrepreneurs, we get caught in a trap where we kind of react to what we read. So I think we need to take a long-term view, and certainly the Bolios are still calling for a recession. It's not a matter of if, it's more a matter of when. So I think this is kind of the time to make hay, and I think one opportunity that every Vistage member should be thinking about is that this is a time we can take price increases, and it's the first time in maybe 6 or 7 years that a lot of companies have felt they've had that opportunity, and frankly, a lot of them have forgotten how. So important we think about how to message that. So if you want to kind of get an ROI from this call right away, if you haven't done it already, I would encourage you to think about price increases and putting that in motion pretty quickly, because I'm not sure we'll have the same opportunities a year for now. So overall, I'm very bullish on the economy as well in the short term, and I feel the confidence out there, but I also think that we have to have a lens out to what's probably coming a couple of years out.
Great, thank you, Mark. If we talk for a minute and shift our discussion now to the actual performance, again, we see some incredibly strong numbers. 79% of CEOs expect increased revenues in the year ahead. Again, that's built on the prior year's performance. 66 are expecting increased profits. So 3/4 are going to grow revenue, 2/3 are going to grow profit. I think this connects well to, Mark, your point earlier about the strength of the economy and the confidence. We have historical low interest rates. We have got easy access to capital. It's a great opportunity and a great time for those organizations that can grow. Thoughts there?
Yeah, no, agreed. I think what we're seeing in budgets in 2018 is a lot of investment in people and technology. And as I mentioned, I think that a lot of people feel, especially their margins that have been under a lot of pressure, might get some relief this year.
Well, you know, that connects brilliantly to the next category, which is really for growth. And we see 64% of CEOs plan to expand their workforce in the year ahead. I wonder how many folks that are listening to this now are in the process of adding headcount. 54% are going to increase investments in the next year. That's on top of the investments that have been made before. So I think, Mark, to reinforce what you had said, is that, you know, I refer to these as, these are the good old days. We'll look back on this period of time and say, wow, those are the good old days, because the Fed's already indicated there's 3 interest rate hikes coming this year and 3 to 4 more next year. You know, we've got the data from the Bolios. So these are the good old days, and that's good news. So expanding now, let's go from where CEOs are thinking in terms of their optimism, their performance, and their plans for growth. And let's understand what their decisions are. And this is information that we asked back in December in our Q4 Confidence Index. And we ask every year is, we want to understand what are the major decisions that our members are making. One of the things we try to do at Vistage Research is to recognize that we don't necessarily have the answers to the questions, and that's not really our job. Our job is to raise the questions, to ask the questions. So we ask this question: what are the major decisions you'll have to make regarding your business in 2018? And I would pause again and ask those of you that are listening to think about what are the big decisions that you're facing. What do you think the top 10 are across the community? Well, again, we've got a great community of folks that respond to our surveys, and this is what we learned. We learned that, again, in a free form, what are your top decisions? These were the words that people chose to describe their key decisions. And from over 1,000 respondents, we had almost 3,000 responses for this. When you take our top 10 and then you group it against all the 3,000, what we found is that these major decisions fell into 5 logical groups. The first being talent, which is the people that you have, recruit, hire, train. The next being customers. How do you find more? How do you win more? How do you retain and grow more? Operations, which is unique to your business. It means one thing in a manufacturing environment and something different in a business services environment. And again, that's dependent upon you and your business. Financial, which is both the financial function of your organization and financial performance. And then leadership. But what jumped out to us here was that talent was at the top, and at 931 people, our 931 responses, that represents 87% of the CEOs responded have talent as one of their top 3 issues. So these were the decisions that our members have told us they're making, and those are the top 10. When we go now and say, okay, those are the decisions you've made, what are the investments that you made? Again, we ask the question, what are the top 3 areas of your business that you'll invest in during 2018? So I ask you to stop and think, what are your investments? Where will you be putting money in place? And again, our top 10 list has a shift to it from last year. And I think this is reflective of access to capital and low interest rates, but we see a real surge into the operational side. And you see that reflected in technology, equipment, facilities, office building, growth, expansion, acquisition. Again, commenting on this confidence and the energy that we see, the economic tailwinds we have, we see this major shift in terms of investments that people are investing in their technology, which is part of their information infrastructure, into equipment, into facilities and buildings. And this is where we see our members investing going into 2018.
Thank you, Joe. It seems like now is the time to capitalize while the economy is strong, as only 35% of our members expect the economy to post significant gains. And I hear you, Mark, about the price increases and how that might be a key part of those increased expectations for revenues and profits. But now let's switch into those key decisions, Joe, that you just mentioned for 2018. You talked about the top business decisions that the data showed. And that seems to be talent, customers, and operations. So we're really going to focus on those 3 areas today, and first focus on the area of talent. So Joe, can you share with us more detail about the plans of small business CEOs as they approach talent?
Yeah, talent has come up consistently both last year and this year as one of the top decisions and top areas of investments that CEOs are making. And as we saw in the earlier chart, that 64% of CEOs are planning for a workforce expansion. Now this creates what we like to call, or we refer to as talent wars. And that is that at a current unemployment rate of 4.1, and again, that varies regionally, but effectively we're at full employment, which means there is not a pool of skilled people like maybe there was in 2009, 2010 from the layoffs of the Great Recession. There's not skilled, talented people looking for work. Rather, there is work, and a lot of work, looking for skilled and talented people. And this goes the range from CEOs down to your entry-level baseline workers. And we've heard stories about varying businesses and their inability to add more trucks to their fleet because they can't get more drivers. Another scenario, a woman owning a manufacturing company in the Midwest, 7 out of 10 applicants for the line work can't pass a drug test. So there's tremendous pressure on organizations to find talent in a pool where there's just not a lot of talent out there available. And what that's creating is the talent wars. And it begins to ask people, while you're looking to acquire new talent, everyone else is as well. In fact, there's a follow-on to this, is that you see, we broke this out. We asked them who's hiring and then how are you hiring? And what's interesting is 46% are hiring throughout the year. But now look at the skews from Q2 to Q1 of next year. I think this supports some of the commentary about the slowing of economy possibly into 2019. But it also suggests that right here, right now, the battle for talent is on. Because this means that 75% of the people that are hiring, and that's 64% of the businesses out there, they're hiring right now. And this has put tremendous pressure on organizations in a somewhat different way, because it's as much about what are you doing to protect, to retain, to develop, to motivate, to engage your existing workforce, as it is to go out and attract and draw in someone new to your organization. Because I'm quite confident during the time that we've been engaged in this conversation so far, someone in your organization got a call from a recruiter, that they are constantly being approached, as probably many of you are, constantly being approached, and the question is, will they answer that call? And it turns into this discussion that before we can talk about growth, before we can talk about adding new people, we have to ensure that the people we have in place are happy, are motivated, and are willing to speak positively about the environment. What that sets up is this new playbook for talent, and Mark thought maybe you could share your thoughts on this, on the talent drivers and commentary on this talent war.
Yeah, I think what the survey says is that acquiring and retaining talent is kind of viewed as a significant constraint for growth. And I think part of that is because the HR playbook is being rewritten because the traditional rules of engagement no longer apply. So, for example, I think the traditional recruiting model is deeply flawed. At 4% unemployment, you don't have the luxury of waiting to recruit at the time that you need people, and then to go through maybe a 4-week process by which you run an ad and try to find your dream candidate. So I think employers are learning that they really can't assess someone's skill in a 1-hour Q&A. It's just the whole system just really doesn't work. So I think recruiting needs to be a 24/7, 365 endeavor, and that the entire company has to be involved if you're truly going to be an employer of choice. So employer branding has become really, really critical, and you need to tell your story all the time and have a pipeline of candidates in place. We're also seeing, I think, a different evaluation of candidates in a more formal way. So I recommend that all members read the book Top Grading, and that they get their entire management team involved in a more methodical kind of interviewing methodology. We're also seeing more personality testing, skills testing, internships, trials, and kind of other forms of assessment. Also, I think attracting millennials requires a completely different playbook. So there was a really interesting speaker at many of the BESs last year named Ben Casinocha, and he led recruiting for LinkedIn. And he pointed out that these employees really look at their work more like a tour of duty. And I think we as employers need to think about it in a similar fashion. So for example, if our paradigm is that we don't want to train people because they're concerned that they'll leave, guess what? They're going to leave. So it's about enriching their resume for them. So a more effective method is to fully engage, have frequent feedback loops, and talk to them about their career progression. And if that eventually means that they separate, then so be it. But I think you'll get much better work out of them, referrals to their friends, and more responsible transitions if you engage with them regularly about their career progression. Also, I think with all of these transgressions that we've been reading about in the business press, and the need for millennials to be more connected with something larger than them, companies are being far more transparent than they used to be, and they're also working towards gamifying their businesses so that employees have kind of incentives that are tied back to KPIs and KPIs that are tied back to their strategy. And finally, I think paying at the 50th percentile is just not cutting it for a lot of companies anymore. So there are markets like Denver where unemployment is more like 2%, and our clients can't hire people at any wage. So I think if you want to hire and retain really successfully and be an employer of choice, having the right work environment and making damn sure you're compensating appropriately is more important than it's ever been.
You know, Mark, I just wanted to build on that if I could, because we had a conversation in one of our network events about the power of culture. And it is the culture of your organization that attracts, rejects, or pushes away prospective employees. And if you look at and measure, if you thought about measuring your own level of employees in terms of net promoter score, how willing are your employees to go out and positively promote your environment as a place where people want to work? That has turned out to be one of the strongest tactics that people are using, the power of their culture to draw in people who want to be part of that culture. So it reinforces much of the stuff that you had said.
Yeah, and I actually think there's a way that you can measure and quantify that. So I think the employers of choice that we work with who are most savvy, one of the things they do is they survey their employees very regularly, but then what they learn in that survey, they play back to their employees in the form of some kind of culture initiatives, and they actively engage their employees through committees or whatever to be part of that process, and therefore proving that they're listening and that the employers are truly part of something larger than them.
Thank you, Mark. It sounds like putting a lot more formality in terms of the assessments that you might use, your 24/7 recruiting, and I love the idea about actually capturing data and projecting that back to the company and really sharing with employees the ideas about how you're going to improve their experience. One thing you noted is that talent can be a constraint for growth, and so our next topic is customers, which was a key area that CEOs are focused on in the coming year. So Joe, can you share with us what we've learned about customer growth from some of our prior research?
Yeah, thanks, Ann. We did a study last fall that we shared with our members, customer growth, decisions for the SMB CEO, and we're really, again, focused in our model of focus now on customers and customer growth of the strategies, the investments, and then what were the winning tactics. And what we wanted to do in this study is separate high performance from no or low performance. And we segmented the responses, and we had over 1,400 responses. We segmented the responses to 28% of those organizations that were multiple year double-digit growth. So double-digit growth prior year, projected double-digit growth current year. And we compared those to companies who for 2 consecutive years had 0 to no growth. And that was about 8%. And then we said, well, what are the high growth doing that the low growth aren't doing? And we found a variety of factors, and we'll invite you to download the research to take a look at it. But one of the things that jumped out was that the high growth businesses were more focused and are more likely to get more new customers than the no growth. Well, we know that new customer growth is hard. It's the hardest thing to do, is about to get a new customer, identify their needs, be able to create and position your capabilities and win that deal, and then fulfill it so they will continue to do business, either on a project basis or renewal basis or whatever your business is. And the power of this is really quite simple, because last year's new customer is this year's revenue base. So those organizations that can consistently outperform, we know the 80-20 rule, which is kind of what the no growth follows. It's the high growth organizations that are addressing the changing environment of buying and selling, and that environment has been changing since I started selling in 1984. It's just a continuation, a different type of change. But we see that these high growth companies, in focusing on customers, understand and put the energy and the resources towards acquiring new customers. What that leads to is the old playbook and the new playbook. So Mark, share with us your thoughts on this evolving customer engagement and those value drivers.
Yeah, I think client acquisition is undergoing a radical shift as we speak. So clients used to want to meet with us face to face. Now they want to read about us on the internet. So many of our clients are subjected to that, evil known as professional procurement. And more than half of professional procurement people today are millennials. And I still think that there are Vistage members who are stuck in a paradigm where they don't think they win business online, so therefore their online presence is not important. And I would say that even if you're not accustomed to winning business online, you're certainly being validated there. And I think more importantly, this is where we're headed. Kind of in a galaxy near you very soon, prospects will click on your website. The shrewd marketers will have this very sophisticated way of engaging those prospects and capturing their information. The opportunity will automatically be routed to the appropriate salesperson based on the prospect's geography or industry or perhaps their company name or size. They will immediately get a digital customer welcome packet that's highly tailored with messaging about why your company is the right partner to fulfill their particular need. All of their information, including what they clicked on your website, will be populated in your CRM, which will auto-generate a request to a salesperson to meet with them. And then this CRM will track every activity over the course of the customer's lifetime. Most of those capabilities I just mentioned are already commercially available today. And I think it was really telling in the earlier slide that in terms of 2018 investment, it sounds like the growth was 2x for marketing than it is for sales, which reinforces the power of these kind of tools that are marketing in front of us. So the salespeople of tomorrow will not be the traditional relationship sellers. So if they are the type of people who they think a relationship is bringing donuts to the client and talking about baseball, I don't think they're long for this world. And I'm not discounting the importance of customer relationships. What I'm saying is that in both B2B and B2C, customers are far more informed than they've ever been, and they're going to gravitate to vendors who can provide end-to-end solutions. And in doing so, they are going to eliminate vendors and work with the ones who are most capable. So unless you're selling something highly commoditized, like in a call center environment or whatever, your salespeople are going to need to be technologically savvy, and they're going to need to be capable of selling into strategic accounts. So we're going to see the segmentation back to the 80-20 rule of the high value accounts and the low value accounts. And I think artificial intelligence is only going to become more accurate as we feed the beast. And I think all of these strategies that I just mentioned, they will be equally or more important for client retention as they will be for client acquisition. And then finally, I think distribution as a channel is under a ton of pressure because companies want to have the opportunity to sell direct online. So I'd say if you're a manufacturer and you're in that conundrum, there are ways to sell direct while also protecting your distributors. And I don't think it has to be an either or. And if there are distributors on the line, I think you need to just be keenly aware of this perception shared by many manufacturers that their distributors not providing as much value as they once did as it relates to customer engagement, marketing, sales, inventory, and so on. So I think it's important that you communicate all of your activities clearly and demonstrate a level of accountability back to the companies that you represent. So I think distributors will need to be more proactive in order to remain relevant in many sectors in the economy.
Well, Marc, you speak to the impact of technology and how it's disrupted every element of our personal lives, but especially in the customer relationship arena, how my business, how my salespeople connect with my customers and the people on those ends, that blurring, merging of the human and the digital. And one of the things that we saw in our study was that both high and low growth organizations are investing heavily in digital marketing and e-commerce plays, trying to find that balance to be there ready when that customer emerges into that environment, that they're able to play in that. So there's no question that technology is disrupting all parts of our world, but specific to the customer relationship, that really is a powerful change agent.
And I also heard that customers are informed online, and I liked the quote you said, Marc. We don't win business online, and just because e-commerce might not be relevant for a small manufacturer, I think that making sure that small businesses are represented so people can actually, potential customers can self-serve, find out the information that they want to know so that they can start that relationship is pretty critical. So there's all levels of on the spectrum of sophistication and leveraging technology, which really leads us to the third point, operations and some of the key decisions, and we saw that as a top investment, and specifically technology. So Joe, can you share about how technology is really leading the list in terms of investments for the year?
Yeah, as part of our survey process, we asked our members inside of the operations category, what are the biggest challenges you faced as it relates to operations? And it's technology, infrastructure, productivity, et cetera. But it's technology that is the biggest challenge. And yet, when we look at the top areas of planned investments in operations, those investments are in technology. Clearly, we need to add equipment and facilities as our business grows and based on our business. But this technology infrastructure, it's the information infrastructure, it's the hardware, it's the network, it's the security that wraps around the network. But most importantly, it's the business applications that sit on that technology that allow the sharing of information and the increased productivity of all of our folks. So when we asked a follow-on question, again, going one more level deeper, we said, which business applications do you expect to spend or invest on in 2018? Now, again, we're separating out hardware, we're separating out maintenance and support, backup, all the things that go on behind the scenes that quite frankly, we don't want to see. But what are the business applications that you're going to invest in? And consistent back with what Marc had said, CRM, managing and engaging the customer, using technology to keep up with that evolving relationship with customers and different type of customers came to the top of the list. Excuse me, paradoxically, we look down at the bottom here at human capital management at 19%, whereas critical as talent is, maybe technology is not a big of driver and influencer in that as what you would see with your customers or with the ERP and your back-end system. So it begins to set up this discussion around technology and how technology is really driving this change. So Marc, talk about those technology value drivers, please.
Well, first, an important caveat. I don't consider myself a technologist per se, but I would say I have a unique vantage point on how Vistage members are leveraging technology. So I think you need to make a distinction between technology companies and technology-enabled companies, and most Vistage members would consider themselves to be the latter. So I think the sea change that we're seeing right now in terms of technology investment is that for many years, members have been focused on things like reducing costs and doing things faster, cheaper, and better. And I think in the future, the focal point will have to be on creating solutions that are more outwardly facing and directly impact the customer experience. So I think there's a couple of questions that Vistage members really need to ask themselves. And the first one is, how will they survive a world driven by algorithms? And I don't think anyone is immune. If you think about kind of your traditional B2B businesses, such as maybe warehouse robotics or fulfillment or things emerging like cashless checkout or web services, it's likely that the largest provider in all of those B2B categories in 5 years is going to be Amazon. And, you know, a decade ago, the most valuable companies in the US were Exxon and GE and Citigroup and Walmart. And now the most valuable companies are Apple and Google and Amazon and Facebook. So the technologists are winning, and we need to be thinking about where will they go from here. And in particular, I think, you know, you referenced a talent war earlier. The other war that's going on is to have the best data. Whoever has the best data is probably going to win. And that implies that we need to have a level of integration where you have access to business intelligence and reporting that you can share back to your clients. So your reporting really needs to be best in breed. That can be a big differentiator. And to that end, I think there are a lot of frustrated Vistage members because they can't find software developers that are capable of creating industry-specific solutions that serve them. But I think a lot of these emerging kind of web-enabled office suites are very powerful, and there will be more options to configure them to your liking here in the near future. So I think the other question that we all need to ask is, how will technology be a competitive advantage for your company? Because if technology is not a competitive advantage, it will very quickly become a disadvantage. So my advice to you is, if you do not have people on your management team who can advise on emerging technology, then go outside and find advisors who can.
You know, Marc, we've seen in many of the spaces this concept of fractional expertise, be that a fractional CMO. We see it in the cybersecurity space where you don't need a full-time cyber person, but you want to be able to connect to a professional and stay on the edge. Do you see that evolving in technology as well?
Yeah, what I'm saying is I think for a lot of Vistage members, you know, if you have 20 employees, it's very possible that the person that is managing your technology is either fractional or, no offense, they used to fix the copiers.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I'm saying that's not adequate today. You need that person, whether it be an external advisor or board member or whatever, who can help advise you on how technology can create a better experience for your customers.
Great.
Excellent. So before we get to Marc's top 10 trends for small and mid-sized businesses, just want to recap some of the things that we heard as we were having the conversation. In the area of talent, I hear that recruiting is 24/7. It's not just when someone leaves, replacing that, but constantly having a leadership pipeline, and that culture is more critical than wages. So that's something I was a key takeaway for talent for me. And then when we look at customers, really thinking about meeting the customers where they are, and that's online, and how much can that experience really connect the people who are online with your salespeople, and what kind of customer experience can you offer online as well. And lastly, in the area of technology and operations, one thing I think is interesting is that you don't need to develop an app from scratch or have someone or find someone that can do something for you. Marc, you mentioned that there's some suites of technology that are pretty powerful and can be configured as opposed to something developed from scratch. So those were some key takeaways that I heard from the conversation so far. So now we want to go to looking ahead and look at your top 10 trends, Marc, for what SMBs should be considering, and understanding this is from your experience and your monitoring of key trends and your conversations with some of our members.
Right. So can you advance the slide? Oh, very good. Okay. So some on the list we've already covered, so I might, and just so you know, skip 2, 3, and 5 in this section. But so first of all, I think that if you look at the recent business press, we have CVS acquiring Aetna, so a pharmacy retailer buying an insurance company, a Walmart buying Humana, same thing, AT&T acquiring Time Warner, so this is a dish provider buying a cable/content provider. So after a decade of industry roll-ups, large companies are running out of options in terms of who they're going to acquire. So instead of horizontal acquisitions, they're focused on vertical integration. And these deals are going to reshuffle the deck in a lot of industries. So every member needs to kind of evaluate their value chain. And if you're unfamiliar with that term, we have a white paper on our website about that, which is optimizeinc.net. That's optimizeinc.net. And Vistage members, I feel like they just constantly need to reevaluate their business model in the face of these dynamic industry shifts and kind of understand what's happening in the value chain kind of before and after the service that you provide. And again, as I mentioned earlier, heading towards a destination of more end-to-end solutions and being something closer to a platform company like many of the technology companies are. Why don't we just flip through all of them so I can see where we're headed. Thank you. So again, I think we've talked about price increases and the storm before the storm. In terms of technology, I think we've been reading about converging technologies such as cloud and Internet of Things and blockchain and a lot of other things. But the star that's emerging in 2018 is very quickly is artificial intelligence, which I think is even much more prevalent than we're aware. And I think the Facebook scandal this week is just evidence of that. So we are very, very close to being in a zero-click world. So imagine you just saying, Alexa, please order me more toilet paper. And not very far after that, Alexa, please find the highest rated commercial realtor in Peoria. So I think artificial intelligence, even being highly relevant to service companies or B2B companies, is not that far away. And I don't offer that to scare people. I offer that to suggest that it's an opportunity for us to embrace these technologies and kind of embed them in our solutions. CRM has been a 4-letter word for a lot of companies for some time because it's been perceived as costly and very hard to implement. And I think many implementations have failed. And the number one reason for that is a lot of companies do not have very well-defined sales processes. And then what they try to do is automate a process that doesn't exist. So I think we've reached this tipping point, as I mentioned earlier, where client acquisition and retention have become so important and also so difficult and costly that companies are looking for very practical tools that they can implement that will impact the sales process. So the capabilities of these systems, including artificial intelligence in marketing that I mentioned earlier, have become so impressive that companies who have historically kind of shied away from CRM, I think they're reevaluating their position. It's a very, very hot topic with Vistage members today. In terms of e-commerce, within our firm, we're working with a handful of Vistage members currently who were once maybe more traditional brick and mortar, who are converting to e-commerce to varying degrees. But I think the influence of e-commerce as a channel and more broadly digital marketing cannot be denied even in B2B, who perhaps have not embraced e-commerce in the past. So I think Vistage member B2B companies are realizing that, or I should say more B2C companies are realizing that being in bed with Amazon is kind of making a deal with the devil. And they're working diligently to kind of build their own direct.com channels in order to wean themselves off Amazon, or at least strike the right balance so that they're in a position to control their own destiny in terms of pricing and so on. So the other thing, those companies are under a ton of pressure to deliver product in 48 hours or very soon same-day delivery. So e-commerce is a very, very dynamic marketplace, to say the least. In terms of adoption of Silicon Valley management and employment practices, I think employers are looking at Silicon Valley, who is leading the way in terms of alternative work environments, collaboration software, and kind of purpose-driven business models that are certainly resonating with younger workers. But I also think they're realizing that we need to be more agile, much like technology companies would be. So I think Silicon Valley is kind of leading in terms of management practices that a lot of other companies are adopting. And in particular, as I mentioned earlier, building these end-to-end platforms that have access to a richness of data is very powerful. And I go into this a lot in my new book, but just think about what services that you may need to add in order to utilize things like AI and have more of an end-to-end solution. Wage inflation, for the first time in many years, we're seeing rising wages. And I think on balance, that's a really good thing for America because we can't maintain our economic dominance without a prosperous middle class. But there's also like a lot of pain in their heels because companies are having to kind of recalibrate their entire business model to find ways to automate and mitigate the higher costs of wages and healthcare and so on. So I think this is a broader conversation for another day, but one thing that I might share is I think that one thing that we see is kind of omnipresent is companies are, in lieu of passing on hourly increases, they're enriching their bonus pools and moving towards more pay performance gamification type models for employment, where a higher percentage of their comp is based on incentive. And that way their labor as a cost is a variable cost as opposed to a fixed cost. Because if we do get into a recession, the only way to mitigate fixed costs is to lay people off. So I would encourage you all to think about your compensation systems a little differently if that doesn't describe you already. Joe already mentioned the prospects of much higher borrowing costs. And I think one thing I would point out is one thing I think we really observed in the Great Recession, and I think we will observe again, is when credit gets tight, regional banks kind of change their behavior and they restrict credit very quickly. So I'm certainly not talking down to regional banks. I'm saying that this is a time where we should be evaluating all of our options and kind of locking in what our credit creditworthiness looks like with those banks before credit tightens any further. And then finally, and kind of my favorite one because it warms my heart, we're seeing a lot of reshoring of American manufacturing. And please understand, this is not a protectionist comment by any stretch, because I think this was kind of mounting before the election, but a lot of manufacturers have come to realize that A, they have virtually no intellectual property protection in many parts of the world, and also the total cost of doing business offshore is really not that much less when you consider both the hard and the soft costs, because managing business offshore requires a lot of internal support. So a lot of companies, they're looking at the gross margin level and they're not considering all the overhead costs that are they need to also allocate. And you sacrifice so much in terms of control and speed to market and those kinds of things. So we're seeing a lot of manufacturing that's returning to the U.S., but interestingly enough, the jobs are not coming back with the manufacturing because so much of it relies on automation. The labor equivalent of automation is about $3 an hour. So, and so what we're seeing is the job comes back with a single operator that probably replaced 5 headcounts previously, but that one employee needs to be more capable and is therefore more expensive. But we do see a lot of opportunity here in the U.S. to bring manufacturing back. So those would be a highlight of some of the trends I'm seeing of Vistage members today.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Mark. And in order to make sure we have time for questions, just want to remind you that you can submit questions through the questions pane on the control panel. We've got a couple that we've received. Before we get to questions, I want to really think about some of the research that we have referenced today and talk about that. I know one of the questions we actually have was the book that you mentioned, Mark, but first we'll go through, Mark, you have your new book, Momentum, and I know you had a book signing last night, so I hope that went well. How companies decide what to do next, and so that's your second book. And then we've also referenced a variety of the studies that we've done from Vistage. So we released the quarterly competence index, the Q1 competence index, just about 10 days ago. Our SMB projections for 2018 is available in the Research Center, as well as some of our topically based reports, including the Guide to Talent Planning for the Middle Market CEO and Customer Growth Decisions for the SMB CEO. And the URL is there at the bottom of the slide. It's vistage.com/research-center. It's where all of our blogs can be found. And I know that, Mark, you were a prolific blogger on our website as well. So thank you for your contributions to our community. So I want to look at the questions that we have. And the first one was really relating, and we might have touched on it, but we talked about talent and growth and the intersection together. And how do CEOs view talent with respect to growth? Are they struggling to grow or having to pass up on opportunities due to lack of talent? Mark, do you want to take this one first?
Yeah, well, I would say there, like anything else, there's a continuum there, right? So it spans from, yes, having to pass on opportunities because they can't handle new volume. Like for example, in the aerospace sector, where it used to be that it might be that a company's backlog might have been 45 days, now it's 90 days. So they're probably less apt to take on the B and C opportunities. And then there are other companies that are just stretching, right? They're using overtime, they're adding second shifts, they're doing what needs to be done. But I would say overall there is definitely a strain, and that converts into companies being able to perhaps pursue fewer opportunities.
Yeah, we've seen in our research, we've been doing a fair amount of work on talent specifically. We didn't want to go deep on it today, but we asked people, what are they doing? What are their tactics in terms of the talent wars and what that means? And while they were at the bottom of the list, was the points that you made, either turning away business or resetting expectations. I spoke with one member, I recall, who had like a window treatment kind of business that was doing very well. he just stopped taking new customers because he couldn't do it anymore, because he would have to compromise quality of what he does in order to accommodate more customers. So we see that. But what's interesting too is the other side, where we see people beginning or setting that first battle in the talent war, is by protecting and defending the people that they have, by making greater investments in employee development, making greater investments in benefits. You know, Mark, you had mentioned the shifting of that in compensation, where there's an opportunity as well to increase benefits, and especially in today's world where healthcare is such an important, maybe tuition reimbursement, those are things that are important. And then raising wages came in third, which was interesting, and I think it's a double-edged sword in that there is wage pressure because you want to be competitive, but then we also hear stories from both sides of if you're trying to compete by throwing more money at it, well, that's the type of person you're going to attract, and they will come to that higher salary and then quickly look for the next higher salary. By the same token, as someone looking for a job, if I see a company that's you know, way out of line in terms of payment, that's as much of a red flag as an opportunity. So it works both ways in this. The talent war, as I said, as I believe, is it begins by protecting and defending and engaging the people that you have. Use that as a foundation to now go in and bring other people. But there's no question that it is throttling growth across all businesses, and hence we have the talent war.
Yeah, if I could just add on that, I'm not advocating that people be at the 100th percentile. I'm also saying you may not win at 50. So what I think some of the best-in-class companies do is they try to come in at 60 or 75, and then they really use their culture as the chip that brings people in.
Okay, moving to another question. We have a question asking to explain the labor equivalent of automation, please.
Right. Okay. I'm saying that the cost of automating something is about the same as paying $3 an hour in labor. So put another way, if it costs you $15 an hour to have a laborer complete a task, automation will do that at about a fifth of the cost.
You know, an interesting point to build on that, Mark, is you know, Tesla is an example of a highly advanced, highly sophisticated, highly roboticized manufacturing plant. And one of the issues they've run into, and why they're struggling to meet their output demands, is they over-automated. That they found there were certain tasks that humans were intuitively better at than trying to get the automation to do it. And that's one of the things that's slowing down their production, is they actually automated it. So it's a double-edged sword, but there's no question that automation in many businesses is only going to grow and increase its footprint, demanding the workforce increase its skill set to stay ahead of what machines can take over.
Yeah, and my point earlier is automation is a little bit of I'd say a false description, because what most manufacturers do is they semi-automate. So they need people to run the machines. And so I think, you know, when you hear people who are maybe a little afraid of automation, it's not that you're going to replace people completely. You're just going to approach the method of manufacturing differently, and it's going to require a different kind of person that you're going to hire than it did 10 years ago.
That's a great point. So something related to hiring, earlier you mentioned the book Top Rating, and I think that was in a reference to hiring employees. Can you confirm the title and author of that book for us, Mark?
Yeah, it's Top Grading. I believe the author is Smart. Maybe someone can look that up real quickly. But just very briefly, its premise is that having a single hiring manager make a decision based on a 1-hour interview is not very effective. So top grading is the idea of involving the entire management team in interviews, maybe not for a frontline worker, maybe it's 3 people instead of 5 or 8, and then formally grading them based on a series of attributes. And by doing it that way, it allows for specialization. So manager A will assess this person's technology skills. Manager B will assess this person's communication skills. So you go much deeper in the interview than, say, a panel all sitting in the same room for an hour. So I think today, with the talent war being what it is, thinking about those terms, and also recruiting 24/7 is really critical if you're going to be successful.
Yeah, Mark, that's Top Grading, one word, and the author is Branford D. Smart, and available on Amazon as we speak. So Top Grading by Branford D. Smart.
Thank you, Joe. Excellent. So the last question I think might take us home is, what advice do you have for companies who recognize the transitions you mentioned and the need to move forward, but have a large hill to climb in transforming culture? So going from order taking to strategic selling, from closely held information to transparency. So that's a big, change management initiative. What advice do you have? And we'll start with you, Mark.
Well, this is going to sound self-serving since I'm a strategic planning facilitator, but I think it all starts with a strategic plan, right? And from there, you share your vision with your team. And what I meant earlier about transparency is employees today, they want to be connected with the future of the company and their individual contribution. So I think it's very important that we lead with vision. So that includes sharing information with your employees about where your company is headed. And then that translates into a set of KPIs that, in my view, best-in-class companies today are making those KPIs more public. And that does not necessarily suggest that you have to open your books. I'm not even going there, because a well-leveraged scorecard does not have to divulge intimate financial details, but it does connect with what success looks like. So I think if you want to move towards transformation in your company in some way, it starts with casting a vision, creating alignment, a group across your enterprise, and then measuring your effectiveness, whether that be in sales, in technology, in culture, whatever, so that you're kind of bringing your employees along for the ride.
Yeah, I'd build on that, Mark, by saying you used a very powerful word, and that's transformation. I think a lot of organizations go through transitions, which is a subtle shift of going from here to maybe just next to us or over here. What you described through this model of strategic planning is true transformation, is true change and elevation and movement towards a higher state of functioning and being that is both daunting and scary and hard to do. So much of what you said connects to that, and I now bring it back and I think about all the things we've talked about today. It really begins to place tremendous pressure on our CEO community to look at the decisions they have to make and what are the perspectives that they need to add to that to ensure they're making the best possible decision for them. So it's interesting how all this comes together when you come down to this last point about how the strategic process, the strategic planning, brings all these aspects of the decisions that we've tried to share with folks today, brings that all together. So thank you for that.
Yeah, if I could just add one last comment, Joe. I think that's the problem that a lot of CEOs face, is they try to make decisions in a vacuum. In other words, they try to make a singular decision about technology change or what should my sales process be. And I don't think you can think that way. You have to make all of these decisions kind of in concert, considering all the variables, including the data you have in front of you. So important that we think long-term in that way.
Thank you so much. So we're approaching the top of the hour. So from Vistage Research, Joe and myself, we strive to be the SMB CEO's most trusted resource for research, data, and expert perspectives on the issues, topics, and decisions of business optimization and leadership enhancement. So we talked a lot about business optimization throughout the session today and really ended on the role of leadership in that. So that's very appropriate. Before we leave you today, we just want to remind you of our upcoming Fridays with Vistage webinar that will be on Friday, May 11th. And that is titled, "In the Culture Struggle, Your First Move Should Be." And so I think this ties really well into what we were talking about today, how culture is so important to be successful, and especially in relation to talent and serving your customers. So mark your calendars and you can register for that webinar online at vistage.com in the Research Center. So thank you so much, Mark and Joe, for sharing your insights today, and everyone for spending the time with us. And we look forward to sharing more research with you in the future.